The cowboy stood frozen as the woman he never wanted opened a letter that could destroy everything his father left behind. A sheet of paper trembled in Nora's hands, while smoke from the burning barn drifted across the snowy yard. Horses screamed in the darkness. Garrett's injured shoulder throbbed beneath a blood-stained bandage as he watched her eyes move across the page. Then she stopped reading, said nothing, just looked at him in a way she never had before. And suddenly, the fire was no longer the thing that scared him most. If you enjoy stories that stay with you, come ride this trail with us. The wind came down from the mountains cold enough to make a man pull his coat tighter, even in early September. Thunder Ridge Valley had buried Silas Thornton that morning. By noon, nearly half the town had gathered inside the law office on Main Street. Boots tracked dust across the wooden floor. Hats rested in rough hands. Chairs creaked beneath ranchers, merchants, and neighbors who had known Silas for most of their lives. Everyone believed they knew what was coming. Silas Thornton had spent 30 years building Thunder Ridge Ranch from raw prairie and stubborn determination. There was only one heir, his son. Garrett Thornton stood near the back wall, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat he clearly hated wearing. At 39, he carried himself like a man more comfortable around cattle than people. He had spent the morning shaking hands, accepting condolences, and wishing everyone would leave him alone. Now he just wanted the paperwork finished. Attorney Samuel Pierce adjusted his spectacles and unfolded the final document. The room grew quiet. Outside, a wagon rattled past. Inside, nobody moved. To my son, Garrett Thornton, the lawyer began, I leave Thunder Ridge Ranch and all associated property under one condition. Garrett frowned. The lawyer rarely paused while reading a will. This time he did. Several people exchanged glances. What condition? Someone muttered. Pierce cleared his throat. Garrett Thornton must enter into lawful marriage with Miss Nora Whitfield within 30 days of this reading. The room froze. A chair scraped suddenly. Someone dropped a pocket watch. Garrett thought he had misheard. What? The word came out flat. Across the room, another voice spoke at the exact same moment. What? Nora Whitfield stood beside the window. She had attended only because she had respected Silas Thornton. Nothing more. At 31, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her dark green dress was simple. Her gloves were worn from work. A few strands of hair had escaped beneath her hat after the windy walk into town. She looked just as shocked as Garrett. Attorney Pierce looked miserable. He continued reading. The marriage must remain legally valid for no less than 1 year. Failure to meet this condition shall result in the sale of Thunder Ridge Ranch. All proceeds shall be distributed among creditors and designated beneficiaries. The room erupted. Questions came from every direction. Silas lost his mind. Why her? What kind of condition is that? Garrett stepped forward. No. The single word silenced the room. No, he repeated. There has to be another page. There isn't, Pierce said softly. Garrett stared at him. His jaw tightened. For a moment it looked as though he might tear the document apart. Instead, he looked toward Nora. She was already shaking her head. This is a mistake, she said. It isn't, Pierce replied. Nora folded her arms. I respected Mr. Thornton, but I am not marrying anyone because a document says I should. Several people nodded. Others watched like spectators at a prize fight. Near the front row sat Edwin Mercer, owner of the largest bank in 3 counties. His expensive suit stood out among ranch coats and work boots. He said nothing. He simply sat there, with his fingers folded over a silver-headed cane, and smiled. The smile lasted only a second. Nobody seemed to notice. Not even Garrett. The meeting ended in confusion. People spilled onto the boardwalk, already sharing theories. By evening, every ranch, store, church pew, and supper table in Cedar Crossing would be discussing the same thing. Garrett Thornton, Nora Whitfield. A marriage nobody wanted. Garrett remained behind. The office gradually emptied until only Attorney Pierce remained. Without a word, the old lawyer opened a desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "Your father left this for you." Garrett took it. The paper felt old. The handwriting belonged to Silas. There was no explanation, no lengthy farewell, only a single sentence. "Trust the woman everyone else overlooks." Garrett read it twice, then a third time. His father had never wasted words. That made the message worse. Outside the office window, he could see Nora crossing the street toward her wagon. The afternoon sun lit the valley beyond town. Golden grass rolled toward the distant mountains. Nora climbed onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. For a brief moment, she looked back toward the law office. Not at Garrett, not at anyone. Just at the building where her future had unexpectedly become tangled with his. Then she drove away. Garrett folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. The town believed the matter was simple. Marry the woman. Keep the ranch. Move on. But standing alone in the quiet office with his father's final words pressing against his chest, Garrett felt something he could not explain. Silas Thornton had planned this. Not as a joke, not as punishment. As if somewhere ahead, hidden beyond the hills and the coming winter, there was something neither Garrett nor Nora could yet see. And whatever it was, it had already begun. The first frost arrived 3 mornings after the reading of the will. It silvered the fence rails around Thunder Ridge and turned every blade of grass into glass beneath the sunrise. Garrett stood beside the corral before dawn, a coffee cup warming his hands. The letter from his father remained folded inside his coat pocket. He had read it so many times the crease had begun to soften. Trust the woman everyone else overlooks. The words annoyed him every time. They also refused to leave him alone. Across the valley, Nora Whitfield was having much the same problem. She sat at her kitchen table with a stack of unpaid invoices beside her. Feed bills, equipment repairs, a note from the general store. The harvest had been weaker than expected. Winter would not be forgiving. Outside her window, the windmill turned slowly against a pale blue sky. Marriage had never been part of her plans. Neither had losing everything. 5 days later, they met again inside Attorney Pierce's office. No crowd this time, only paperwork, a marriage license, 2 witnesses, a silence neither seemed interested in breaking. "You understand what this means," Pierce said quietly. Garrett signed first. His pen scratched across the paper. Nora watched him. Then she signed beside his name. The room remained still. Nothing felt romantic. Nothing felt triumphant. It felt like 2 people stepping onto a bridge neither trusted. The wedding took place the following Sunday. Pastor Elijah Reed stood beneath the small wooden church cross. The building smelled faintly of pine boards and lamp oil. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows. A handful of townspeople attended. Most had come for curiosity rather than celebration. Garrett wore a clean black jacket. Nora wore a cream-colored dress she had carefully mended herself. No flowers, no music, no grand speeches. Only vows spoken plainly. When it was over, people filed outside whispering. Some hid their comments. Others did not bother. Abigail Mercer stood near her father's carriage. Young, well-dressed, observant, she watched Garrett and Nora with unusual interest. Her father, Edwin Mercer, offered polite congratulations. His smile never quite reached his eyes. By sunset, Garrett and Nora arrived at Thunder Ridge Ranch. The main house sat on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, weathered but strong. like the man who had built it. Garrett carried Nora's trunk inside. He set it near the staircase. "The room at the end of the hall is yours," he said. She nodded. "Thank you." That was the longest conversation they had all day. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Separate rooms, separate routines, shared responsibilities. Nothing more. Garrett rose before first light every morning. He checked fences, counted cattle, reviewed supply ledgers, returned home after dark. Nora noticed things she hadn't expected. He never left work unfinished. He never complained. He never visited the saloon. And every promise he made, even the smallest one, was kept. One afternoon, she mentioned a broken gate hinge. The next morning, it had been repaired. No announcement, no expectation of praise, just fixed. The realization unsettled her, because it did not match the man the town described. Late October arrived with colder nights. The mountains carried snow across their peaks. One evening, Nora sat on the porch steps wrapping twine around seed sacks for storage. The ranch yard glowed under moonlight. Everything appeared peaceful. Then a horse screamed. Garrett was already moving before the second sound came. He burst from the barn carrying a lantern. Nora rose instantly. The gate to the north paddock swung open. Several horses were running hard across the pasture. Too hard. Toward the western ravine. Garrett's face changed. "Get your coat," he said. "Now." There was no time for questions. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding through darkness. Cold air stung their faces. Hooves pounded frozen ground. The scattered horses flashed white beneath the moonlight. Someone had cut the ropes securing the paddock gate. Not an accident. Not weather. A knife. Garrett spotted it immediately. The animals were heading toward dangerous terrain where a fall could kill them. He urged his horse faster. Nora followed without hesitation. The valley opened before them. Wind roared through the grass. Together they worked the herd, turning one horse, then another, slowly redirecting them away from danger. The work lasted nearly an hour. By the time the final animal returned safely toward the ranch, both riders were exhausted. Neither spoke at first. Their horses walked side by side through silver moonlight, breath rising from their mouths. The ranch appeared in the distance, a cluster of lantern lights against the darkness. Garrett finally broke the silence. "You ride well." Nora looked ahead. "So do you." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Gone almost immediately, but she noticed. Back at the barn, they secured the horses together. Garrett examined the cut rope beneath his lantern. Clean slice. Sharp blade. Intentional. Someone had done this. Someone wanted damage. He looked toward the dark horizon. Thinking. Calculating. Nora watched him quietly. For the first time since the wedding, she understood something. Garrett Thornton might never have wanted this marriage, but he would protect what belonged to him. The ranch, the livestock, the people under his roof, even if he never said so aloud. And somewhere beneath the cold Montana sky, the distance between them became just a little smaller. Neither one mentioned it. Neither one needed to. November settled over Thunder Ridge Valley with a hard wind and shorter days. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of gray cloud more often than not. Frost lingered until noon. The cattle stayed closer to shelter. Life on the ranch should have been simple. Instead, trouble arrived one piece at a time. The first sign came in the form of a letter. Garrett found it folded beneath a stone on the front porch. The cattle buyer from Billings was canceling their winter contract. No explanation. Just a short note and a signature. 3 days later, a feed supplier failed to arrive. The wagon never came. The following week, part of the north fence was found torn down. Not weather damage. The cuts were too clean, the posts too carefully removed. Each problem by itself could have been explained. Together, they felt different, like someone slowly tightening a rope. One cold morning, Nora stepped into the kitchen carrying a tin pail from the well. She stopped immediately. A dark sheen floated across the water. Garrett crossed the room. Neither spoke. He dipped a finger, smelled it. Oil, machine oil. Someone had poured it into the well during the night. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then Garrett set the bucket aside. "We'll use the spring creek until I clean it out." No anger, no shouting. Just certainty. That worried Nora more. Because she was beginning to learn what Garrett looked like when something truly mattered. He became quieter, not louder. That afternoon, they sat at opposite ends of the dining table. Account books spread between them. Receipts, supply invoices, canceled contracts, feed orders. Garrett ran a hand across his jaw. Too many things at once. Nora nodded. "Someone wants us struggling." The words remained between them. Neither disagreed. A week later, Nora rode into Cedar Crossing. The county records office occupied a narrow brick building beside the post office. She had come looking for old property surveys. Thunder Ridge had been in the Thornton family for decades. If someone was targeting the ranch, the answer might be buried somewhere in the records. The clerk disappeared into the storage room. Several minutes later, he returned looking confused. "The files aren't here." "What do you mean they aren't here?" "They should be." He checked again. Then a third time. Nothing. Survey maps, boundary records, ownership filings. Gone. Nora stood very still. Outside the window, she could see Edwin Mercer's bank across the street. Large, prosperous, busy. A man exited carrying loan documents. Another entered. The brass sign gleamed in the sunlight. For a moment, she simply watched. Then she rode back to Thunder Ridge. That evening, she told Garrett everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stared into his coffee cup. Steam rose slowly into the room. Finally, he said, "Missing records don't disappear by accident." Nora looked at him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Probably." Neither needed to say Mercer's name. It was already there, hanging in the air. The weather broke 2 days later. Rain arrived before dawn, cold, relentless. By afternoon, the roads had become rivers of mud. Garrett had been checking cattle in the western hills when the storm intensified. Nora found him near sunset. Both were soaked before they reached the small line shack overlooking the grazing range. The cabin was little more than 4 walls and a stove. Wind rattled the roof. Rain hammered the windows. They hung their coats near the fire. Neither spoke much at first. The silence felt easier now. Garrett sat beside the stove, turning a tin coffee cup between his hands. Nora watched the rain slide down the glass. The storm trapped them there for hours. Eventually, Garrett spoke. "There was someone once." Nora looked over. He kept his eyes on the fire. The story came slowly. A woman he had planned to marry years ago. A fever swept through the valley. By winter, she was gone. The words were simple, without decoration, which somehow made them heavier. When he finished, the cabin fell quiet again. The rain continued outside. After a while, Nora spoke too. About growing up near the edge of town. About always feeling noticed and overlooked at the same time. About learning early that depending on yourself hurt less than depending on other people. Garrett listened. No advice, no interruptions, just listened. The fire cracked softly. For the first time since their marriage, neither seemed eager for the storm to end. The next morning, the rain stopped. The world smelled of wet earth and pine. They rode home together. Something had shifted. Small, but real. 3 days later, Pastor Elijah Reed was found outside the church. A ranch hand spotted him before sunrise. He was alive, shaken, barely conscious. Garrett and Nora arrived just as the doctor was helping him inside. The old pastor's face looked pale beneath the lantern light. His eyes opened briefly. He saw Nora first, then Garrett. His voice barely rose above a whisper, yet both heard every word. "Mercer doesn't want the ranch." The pastor swallowed, his breathing uneven. "He wants what's under it." Then his eyes closed again. The room fell silent. Outside, church bells rang softly in the cold morning air. And for the first time, Garrett and Nora understood. This was no longer about fences, or contracts, or missing records. Someone wanted Thunder Ridge badly enough to risk everything, and whatever was hidden beneath that land was worth far more than either of them had imagined. The days that followed felt different. The valley looked the same. The mountains still stood beyond the prairie. Cattle still drifted through the winter grass. Smoke still rose from chimneys each morning. But beneath it all ran a quiet tension. Garrett felt it every time he rode the property line. Nora felt it whenever she noticed the same rider lingering too long near the road before disappearing again. Pastor Elijah recovered slowly. The doctor ordered him to rest. That did not stop Garrett from visiting. One afternoon, he found the old pastor sitting beneath a blanket near the church stove. A Bible rested on his lap. His eyes looked tired. "You said Mercer wants what's under the ranch," Garrett said. The pastor stared into the fire. "I heard something years ago." "What?" "A railroad survey." Garrett frowned. The pastor nodded slowly. "Men from Helena came through. They spoke about routes, water access, stone deposits. Why never tell anyone? I didn't know it mattered." The old man's voice dropped lower. "Now I think it does." The ride home took Garrett nearly an hour. Cold wind swept across the valley. His thoughts stayed with the pastor's words. That evening, he unlocked a storage room that had belonged to his father. Dust floated through lantern light. Shelves lined the walls. Old ledgers, survey maps, receipts tied with string, records spanning decades. Nora joined him after supper. Neither spoke much. They worked side by side, searching, sorting, reading. Hours passed. Then Garrett found it. A folded survey map hidden inside an account book. His pulse quickened. He spread it across the table. Nora moved closer. The map showed a proposed railroad corridor. A thin red line crossed directly through Thunder Ridge Valley. Near the bottom corner was another notation. Water reserve. Limestone deposit. Future development potential. The room became very still. Nora looked up first. Mercer knew. Garrett nodded. Probably years ago. Everything suddenly made sense. The pressure, the missing records, the canceled contracts, the sabotage. Mercer wasn't interested in cattle. He wanted control of the valley before the railroad arrived. And Thunder Ridge sat directly in the middle of it. The next morning, Garrett packed copies of the documents into a leather satchel. He intended to bring them to town, to Attorney Pierce, to anyone who could help. But he never got the chance. The fire started after midnight. Nora woke first. The smell reached her before the sound. Smoke. Thick. Wrong. She threw open her bedroom door. Orange light flashed across the hallway window. Then came shouting. She ran outside. The feed barn was burning. Flames climbed the dry timber walls. Sparks swirled into the black sky. Ranch hands raced toward the well. Buckets flew from hand to hand. Someone yelled for more water. Someone else shouted about the horses. Nora turned. The smaller stable beside the feed barn had become trapped behind the fire. Several frightened horses were still inside. Without thinking, she ran. Heat struck her immediately. Smoke rolled through the yard. She reached the stable door and forced it open. The horses panicked, kicking, pulling against their stalls. She worked as fast as she could. One rope, then another. A mare bolted past her, then a gelding. The smoke thickened. A beam crashed somewhere behind her. Outside, Garrett saw her disappear into the building. His stomach dropped. "Nora!" No answer. He threw himself from his horse. Someone grabbed his arm. "The roof's going!" Garrett pulled free, then ran straight into the smoke. Inside, visibility had nearly vanished. The air burned his lungs. "Nora!" This time he heard her cough. He followed the sound, found her near the back stalls. The final horse had broken loose. For one brief second, their eyes met through the smoke. Neither wasted time speaking. Garrett grabbed her hand. Together they pushed toward the exit. The roof groaned overhead. A shower of sparks fell nearby. Then suddenly cold air hit their faces. They stumbled outside. The crowd surged toward them. The stable collapsed moments later. Silence followed. Only the crackle of burning timber remained. Garrett sat heavily in the dirt. His shoulder had taken the worst of it. His sleeve was scorched. Nora knelt beside him. For the first time since she had known him, her hands shook. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for him to notice. Enough for her to realize it. Neither mentioned it. The fire burned until dawn. By sunrise, the barn was gone. So was half the winter feed. Worse still, several cattle were missing. Tracks in the mud told the story. Someone had used the chaos. Driven animals away while everyone fought the fire. Mercer had escalated. The attack no longer hid behind paperwork. 3 days later, Garrett remained confined to the house while his shoulder healed. Nora changed the bandages each evening. One night, she reached inside his coat to remove it before cleaning the wound. Something crinkled. A folded piece of paper. She recognized it immediately. Silas Thornton's letter. The paper looked worn, carried daily, protected carefully. Trust the woman everyone else overlooks. Nora stared at it longer than she meant to. Garrett noticed. Neither spoke. Yet something passed between them. A quiet understanding. Later that same week, another visitor arrived after dark. A nervous man in a worn coat, formerly a clerk at Mercer's bank. He asked to see Garrett and Nora privately. They sat around the kitchen table while wind rattled the windows. The man's hands trembled around his coffee cup. Finally, he spoke. "Mercer isn't alone." Garrett leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The clerk swallowed. "There is someone helping him." "Who?" The man looked toward the door as if expecting someone to appear. Then back at them. "Someone in town government." The words landed heavily. For months they had believed Mercer was the danger. Now they understood he had protection, influence, a partner hidden in plain sight. Outside, snow began falling softly across Thunder Ridge Valley. Inside, the firelight flickered against the walls. And for the first time, Garrett and Nora realized the fight ahead was bigger than either of them had imagined. Snow covered Thunder Ridge Valley by the second week of December. The world seemed quieter beneath it. Fences disappeared beneath white drifts. The cattle gathered near shelter. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow gray ribbons. But beneath that peaceful surface, things were moving. Garrett and Nora spent every spare hour gathering evidence. Old ledgers, survey records, canceled contracts, copies of land filings. The former bank clerk provided names and dates. Attorney Pierce provided access to county records. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Every forged document, Every missing survey, every suspicious loan, every failed auction. They all passed through the same office, Judge Franklin Boone's office. The discovery left Garrett staring silently at the papers spread across the dining room table. Outside, wind pushed snow against the windows. Inside, the lamp flame trembled. "Boone?" Nora asked quietly. Garrett nodded. He signed everything. The judge had spent 20 years earning the town's trust. He attended church every Sunday, shook every hand, settled every dispute. People respected him, which made the truth harder to accept. 3 days later, Nora found something unexpected. She had returned to the storage room searching through another box of Silas Thornton's papers. Most contained receipts, tax records, cattle inventories. Then she discovered a second envelope. It had never been opened. Her name was written across the front. Nora carried it downstairs. Garrett looked up as she entered. Neither spoke. She carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting matched the first note. Silas Thornton. The room grew still as she read. Many years earlier, before either Garrett or Nora had been born, Nora's father had saved Silas during a spring flood along the Yellowstone River. Silas had been swept from his horse. The current nearly carried him away. A stranger pulled him from the water. That stranger was Nora's father. The letter explained everything. Silas had never forgotten the debt. Years later, when he learned Mercer had begun quietly buying land throughout the valley, he realized something else. The Whitfields could not be bought. They never had been. Silas believed Garrett and Nora together stood the best chance of protecting Thunder Ridge when he no longer could. The marriage had never been about inheritance. It had been a plan. His final plan. When Nora finished reading, neither moved for several moments. The fire cracked softly. Garrett stared at the letter. For the first time since his father's death, he understood. Trust the woman everyone else overlooks. His father had known exactly what he was doing. The public hearing took place just after Christmas in Cedar Crossing. Nearly the entire town attended. The courthouse overflowed. Farmers, merchants, ranchers, families. Everyone wanted answers. Edwin Mercer arrived in a tailored black coat. Judge Boone sat at the front looking calm and confident. For a while it seemed as though nothing would happen. Mercer denied everything. Boone denied everything. Several witnesses suddenly changed their stories. The room grew restless. Then Garrett stood. He carried a wooden box beneath one arm. Inside were the records, the originals, the missing surveys, the forged signatures, the financial transfers linking Mercer and Boone together. One by one, Attorney Pierce placed them before the hearing panel. Silence spread through the room. Mercer's confidence vanished first. Boone's vanished second. By the time the final document was presented, the outcome was obvious. The scheme collapsed in full view of the town. Neither man left the courthouse freely. Outside, snow drifted across Main Street. People stood talking quietly, trying to understand how long the deception had existed beneath their noses. Thunder Ridge Ranch was safe. The valley was safe. And for the first time in months, Garrett slept through an entire night. Winter passed. Then spring arrived. Grass returned to the hillsides. Calves appeared in the pastures. The railroad crews finally reached the valley. Life moved forward. One bright April morning, Attorney Pierce arrived carrying a leather folder. Garrett and Nora sat together on the porch overlooking the ranch. The old lawyer cleared his throat. The conditions of the will have been fulfilled. Neither answered. Pierce placed a document on the table. Marriage dissolution papers. The agreement that could set them both free. Nora looked at the paper, then at Garrett. "If that's what you want," she said softly, I'll sign. The wind moved gently through the cottonwoods. Somewhere beyond the barn, a horse whinnied. Garrett stared at the document for a long time, long enough for everyone to wonder what he would do. Then he picked it up and tore it cleanly in half. The sound seemed louder than it should have. Attorney Pierce blinked. Nora froze. Across the yard, several ranch hands stopped working. Garrett looked at her, not quickly, not nervously, just honestly. I never wanted a wife. The words hung in the spring air. I never wanted any of this. Nora listened quietly. Garrett glanced toward the valley below, toward the ranch they had fought to save, then back at her. But somewhere between saving this ranch and saving me, his voice softened. You became home. For a moment, nobody spoke. The breeze stirred the edges of the torn paper on the porch floor. Nora's eyes glistened. She did not rush toward him. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply stepped beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and stayed there. Below them, Thunder Ridge stretched across the valley, strong, unbroken. The same land that had nearly torn them apart. The same land that had brought them together. And for the first time since Silas Thornton's will had been opened, nobody in Cedar Crossing doubted what they were seeing. The cowboy who never wanted her had fallen in love with her after all. Not suddenly, not easily, but completely. And the valley would remember that story for a very long time. Maybe that's why stories like this stay with us. Because deep down, most of us know what it feels like to carry something we never asked for. A responsibility, a loss, a promise. A person who entered our lives at the wrong time and somehow became the reason we kept going. If you had been standing on that porch at Thunder Ridge, with the spring wind moving through the cottonwoods and the mountains turning gold in the evening light, what would you have done? Would you have walked away when things became difficult? Or would you have stayed long enough to discover that some of life's greatest gifts arrive disguised as burdens? Garrett thought he was protecting a ranch. Nora thought she was surviving another hard season. Neither realized they were slowly healing parts of themselves that had been wounded for years. And maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath all of it. Sometimes trust begins long before love does. Sometimes loyalty shows up before affection. And sometimes the people who change our lives are the ones we never expected to need. The land was saved. The fight was over. But the real victory was much quieter than that. Two people chose to stay. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where it touched your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, second chances, forgotten promises, and the kind of love that grows slowly and honestly, I hope you'll spend a little more time here. There are more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people who make you feel at home.